Well, kia ora and welcome to this, I think, the either second or third edition of Michael and Deborah Have a Chat. Let's face it, doesn't make too much difference, but this is not an ordinary edition, this is a budget special. Because as you'll be aware, yesterday we had the first ever Wellbeing budget presented by Grant Robertson. So we thought it would be good to spend a little bit of time focused on some of the key messages and policies that were coming out of the budget and the impact they're going to have on people. And the thing I just wanted to touch on first, Deborah, builds a little bit off our discussion last week, which was about this concept of well-being
and what it means,
and its basis in the living standards framework and kind of that broader assessment as to what is success in our country, and is our success just having a surplus or deficit, or do we measure it in different ways? And the thing I was quite struck by, and for folks who, there might be a couple of people out there who didn't watch the entire budget debate in Parliament, I don't know, but if you did, the budget debate is led by the Minister of Finance, in this case Grant Robertson. And Grant spoke for probably a good 40 minutes or so. And his speech, which is published in a handy booklet, it was quite different from previous budget speeches I've had. And so he actually began his speech by talking about what the wellbeing outlook is for New Zealand. So past budget speeches I've heard have tended to sort of just list through the fiscals. What's the projected growth rate, surplus or deficit, international outlook in terms of growth, unemployment rate, all of those things which are quite important. What Grant actually started out with was a wellbeing outlook, and he did talk about the books, but he also talked about the measurements of our human capital in the living standards framework. He talked about the fact that generally New Zealanders are, and I'm reading here, healthy and well educated. Our life expectancy continues to gradually increase. He talked about the fact that our natural capital is generally worsening. This is something that the living standards framework has told us, that we have this great store of natural capital, but actually there are real challenges, and think about our rivers and streams in that front. He talked about our social capital, which a big part of that is how well connected we are. And he actually talked about the way in which you can measure social capital, things like being free from corruption, the trust we have between people in our country compared to other countries. So the budget started off with that much broader outlook about how we're actually doing as a country.
It's quite different, isn't it? And I think the analogy we've heard is it's a bit like the annual report from a company. All right, and those of you who hold shares or follow the share market, you'll get an annual report from the companies you invest in, or maybe if you're an accounting student, you've read some of them or something like that. And the front 2/3 of any annual report is actually occupied by stories about what the company is doing and words, and the actual financials don't come till towards the end. That's what Grant has done this time.
Yeah, that's right. Really looking at the means and the ends, and the financials are not the ends; they're a means to delivering well-being for people.
Yeah.
Now, in that section, when he sort of went through that high-level analysis, he then kind of ended on the challenges. Look, this is where we're at. These are the stores of capital we have. These are the things we can draw upon to improve people's lives. And when we've looked at all that stuff, these are the things that maybe we're not doing so well on, that we need to work on. And I don't think it's any big surprise to a lot of people that one of the key things that's been highlighted through that analysis has been mental health in New Zealand. Certainly, I don't know about you, but I remember at the last election campaign in 2017, as politicians, we go into meetings and we have our policies and our lines and the key things we're going to communicate. I always listen out for the things that people raise to me. What are people really feeling on the ground? And every meeting I went to, people raised mental health.
I think the thing about mental health is it touches all of our lives, whether it's because we've become ill ourselves, or got a family member who's ill, or an employee or a colleague or a student or whatever. And we all know people who have had real mental health challenges. And we do have some good emergency care available in New Zealand for mental health, and I know when people in my own family have been touched by severe mental health difficulties, they have been able to access help through the system, but it's taken a while. And one of the big things that this budget does is it takes all mental health seriously, and particularly what we're calling that low to mid-range mental health, which is kind of an odd way to put it, but what we're talking about is things like the anxiety that so many young people seem to experience now, or depression. Many people can keep on functioning quite well through depression, but it does, I was going to say it colours their lives, it actually takes all the colour out of their lives. And often it can be quite hard to access specialist care for those forms of mental health difficulties, because the resources simply haven't been there.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, one of the stories I kept hearing during that campaign was of people coming in when they'd got to a point of realising that they had a problem and they needed some help. And sometimes it took people a long time to get to that point. And the response has often been, well, okay, I'll give you a referral. The waiting list might be 6 months and you get 5 appointments.
And here, have some pills.
Yeah, pretty much.
Yeah. So what this budget does, and I just find this really exciting, is there's a huge chunk of money going into mental health. And it's coming from a variety of ministries. A whole set of ministers work together to develop this package. And the objective of this is to ensure that people can access mental health care kind of immediately, instead of having to go onto a waiting list. That actually, in your own GP's surgery, there will be someone who can connect you with mental health services pretty much straight away and will walk with you. So they won't do the mental health care themselves, but they will connect you with the services you need. They'll help you to get to the appointments. They'll help you to find the right sort of place to be. So it's quite a different approach to mental health.
Yeah, we were talking with some of our colleagues this morning, and I think it was Liz Craig made the really good point that if you're someone who is struggling with mental health, be it depression or anxiety or some other challenge, if there are barriers that are put in the way, if you try and get help and it's not there, if it's difficult, if you have to make additional appointments or get referred to some other agency or come back later, often things are so tough that having made the effort and not got what you need, many people will just not be able to follow up. So I think that's what makes it particularly critical, that when people come in, it's quick.
Yep.
It's easy. The support is offered instead of people having to chase it.
Yep. So I think that will make a huge difference. Of course, we've got a challenge in that we need many more people working in mental health care to help with this, and we'll need to train people. But the whole package is has got that in mind, that the need to train people as well. So I've just heard our National Party colleagues saying not one job has been created by this budget. I'm actually going, there is a whole need that we need to meet. We're trying to put the resources in to meet it, and actually there will be jobs in that space as well. So that's quite short-sighted of them, I thought.
Of course, the National Party always says governments don't create jobs, but
yeah, well.
Anyway, just the other thing on that is, I think, probably worth pointing out, and this has again been a bit of a feature of the Wellbeing budget, is if we want to tackle these wellbeing challenges, often it does have to be things that you plan over the long term. And one of the things Grant Robertson has pointed out is that historically in budgets, we've often given a dollop of money for the coming year and felt quite good at that tick and then walked away. Whereas the wellbeing approach quite often is saying there's work to do over 5 or 10 years, and then actually in terms of kind of the accounting reality of the budget, we're actually doing far more in terms of allocating money over that kind of term. So the mental health package is over 5 years, slightly different territory, but there's investment in school property, which is over 10 years in the budget, which gives schools and the sector the ability to plan forward in terms of what they're doing. So I think that's quite a useful little shift as well. And
it's all fitting in with this wellbeing approach. As we discussed last time, it's a newish way of doing budgets. It's going to take time to bed in. And it was interesting looking at the reporting this morning. The front page of the Dominion Post led with a whole lot of areas where we were spending money. As newspapers traditionally have with budgets, they haven't really focused on what's different about this budget. And I suspect that it'll take a long time for people to understand the wellbeing approach and to see that it is that approach that goes out over years. It'll be a bit of a slow burner budget. I think in 5 or 6 years' time, people will go, that was the start of when we changed the way we did budgeting, and look where we are now. Yeah.
That's right.
It's pretty exciting.
Yeah. Some other good things in that mental health package, which again kind of point to the way that we've been trying to link up different portfolios instead of the old-fashioned government siloed approach. So there's the extension of school nurses as well, which I think last year we extended up to Decile 4 schools.
Yeah, and it's going to go up to Decile 5 now.
Yeah.
And there's money going into the Housing First program, which is the program where where people are homeless, and the objective is just to say, well, what's the problem? The problem is they're homeless. Let's get them into a home, and then we'll sort the other stuff around that. And so there's money going in for mental health care in that respect as well.
And again, with this, it's about saying we don't look at the portfolios in isolation.
Yeah.
So if you go to the evidence, we know that a lot of people with mental health challenges are the same people who are sleeping rough or have itinerant housing, because you've got big mental health challenges.
It's hard to stay housed.
There's a risk of going down the route of drug and alcohol addiction. Income might be not regular in your life because of those challenges, and you end up in those difficult housing situations.
And of course, that's the other space where something's being done around mental health. It's not just mental health, it's mental health and addiction services.
Yeah.
So there's actually money being spent to build facilities where people can receive the help they need in order to manage with addictions or to overcome addictions. That's brilliant. Yeah, that's long-term care, and it'll all take a long time for it to all really bear fruit, but it's such a huge step in the right direction.
Yeah, I just hope that people can see that this is about taking mental health seriously. It's been quite a long time. There's been, and this isn't just about governments. I think as a society, there's been all this stigma and hiding mental health problems in the shadows for a really long time.
Yeah.
In our country and in other places as well. And it kind of feels to me like in recent times we've made a pretty decisive shift as a society to saying this is important, we need to focus on it, and now we've got a government approach that's linked up and is putting the investment in place that's needed. So that feels good.
And I suppose the one other thing I'd want to draw out of that whole mental health package is the way we're talking about it. It's not just throwing a heap of money at it. There's actually a whole plan in place as to how to really build and work within this sector so that it adds to well-being. And that's why, I think, as I said last time, I don't like that word budget. This is the government's plan as to how we are going to achieve something in this space. And, so that's the big overall goal. And then here's the various things we're going to do to achieve that. And then behind that, there's how much money we're spending in each area.
Yeah. It's a really good point. And again, this is one of the things that Grant Robertson keeps hammering, is that a wellbeing budget needs to be actually informed by evidence.
Yes.
And so actually a lot of the work that's been done in terms of the mental health package comes from the mental health inquiry. We set up a group of people who had lived experience, expert experience, to come together in that inquiry, look at where we're at in New Zealand and make recommendations in terms of what needed to change. And I think we've accepted 38 out of 40 of those recommendations.
Yeah.
And that's largely how this package has been informed.
Yeah.
And so I think that's really important to just, for us to be aware of, is that evidence and science has informed a lot of what we're doing in here. We're still going to make political decisions and value judgments, but actually let's back it up with evidence as well.
And actually, of course, it's not just the mental health area that we've done a whole lot of work in this budget. We've also, there's a whole package around improving child wellbeing. And again, that's informed by evidence. There's work around supporting Māori and Pasifika aspirations, around building a productive nation, and around transforming the economy. I guess the mental health one grabbed me because I'm like a lot of New Zealanders. It has touched me and my family personally, and it means a lot.
Absolutely, and I think lots of families will feel that way. But you mentioned child poverty as well, and that's, I'm just hoping I've got the booklet. I don't have the booklet. It might be over there.
I think I carry these things around with me, Mike.
Yeah, this is one of the other really substantial things. Child poverty report, there we go. Is that in this budget, we've now embedded child poverty targets.
Yeah.
So in the short term and the long term, I think we've got a baseline rate. We've measured where we're at with child poverty at the moment, including and excluding housing costs, and also looked at a range of what we call measures of, what do we call them? Material deprivation.
Right, yeah.
So really objective stuff like, do kids go to school with shoes or not? Are kids missing out on a meal on a daily or a weekly basis? Really objective things that you can use to assess where where poverty is at. And then in this document, which is embedded in the budget, we're saying in the next 3 years, we're going to, the intention, the target is to move child poverty down by this much, and then there's a 10-year rate as well, which is basically about halving child poverty in New Zealand. And when we come back and do future budgets, we'll be held to account for that.
And that's the important thing, because we know that all of us work towards what's measured. We see it with kids at school who always want to know whether an assessment counts towards their NCEA credits, and if it doesn't, well, they're not so keen on doing it. So you are what you work towards what you measure. If we set out to measure child poverty and to measure some of those hard stats, then it's not just those of us sitting in the Parliament, but it's all the government agencies will start working towards it because it's a priority for us.
Yeah. Material hardship is what it's called, sorry.
Yeah. Yeah.
And there's some really good measures in here around that. Of course, there's the Families Package, which came in last year, but is still continuing to filter through. And one of the things I felt really good about was the way in which we've picked up on the indexing of benefits to families.
Yeah.
This is one of the major recommendations, the Welfare Expert Advisory Group. And we'll now have benefits which are indexed to movements in the average wage. So basically, benefits have been slipping behind the average wage over the years, and now they're going to keep pace with it.
And alongside that is shifting the threshold at which the abatement rate cuts in. Now that's the rate where if you're on a benefit and you also have a few hours work, you earn a certain amount of money, then your benefit gets cut back a bit. And what we've said is, hang on a second, if the minimum wage goes up, well, we actually need to lift that abatement rate as well. So that you can still continue doing the same number of hours of work without having your benefit reduced. So it's a way to help people do a bit of employment, which often helps them along while they're on the benefit. It can make a real difference, but without them sort of somehow getting whittled away all the time.
Yeah.
So it's really positive moves.
Yeah. Now, staying in this space, as a Labour government, there's always a good healthy reality check from many of our friends and supporters in the community about the fact that that's good, guys, but there's heaps more to do.
Yep.
And certainly there's been some of that feedback in this space, that there were lots of recommendations from the Welfare Expert Advisory Group.
Yep.
Lots more that still needs to be done on this area. Life is still pretty tough for a lot of people who are existing on benefits. What's your take on that in terms of how we deal with the fact that there's an absolute mountain here to work through?
Well, there is still a lot of need, and there's just no way around that. And that need has been created, over 20 to 30 years, I think. It's not just happened in the last few years. So in terms of sort of shifting the way we do government and the way we run our economy so that we can meet that need, it's not going to happen in one budget. What we've done in this budget is taken some pretty critical steps, especially around that indexing. And there's no lack of will to keep on working on those objectives within the Labour Party and in the government. But we need to take people with us. All right. So, we could go out and spend another $6 billion on benefits just like that, as was recommended by the Welfare Working Group. But we'd have to raise taxes a hell of a lot to do that. So there's a whole sort of balancing of what we can do as a nation that has to go on in that
huge
space.
need across all of the big areas: housing, health, education, social security, but there's I think $3.8 billion of new expenditure in this budget, which is a little more than was
anticipated,
and quite a big jump on last year as well. So it's kind of trying to chart that balance between making sure we manage the books well. That we have to be aware of the fact that internationally things are a bit dicey.
Mm-hmm.
There could be a downturn out there that affects us, but man, we've got to make these investments.
And we're doing it.
Yeah. I'm just thinking we're probably coming towards the end of our time, but how about this for a way to end? Very quickly, one more particular policy that's really stood out for you that you like the look of it. It's really got the cut of your jib.
It's the donations policy for schools. So it's deciles 1 to 7 schools. So if those schools forego getting a voluntary donation, then we'll pay $150 for each student at those schools. So all the schools in my electorate are pretty pleased about that. It'll make a real difference to them, especially my decile 1 school, Glenavon, where they don't charge donations. So this is just a straight out huge lift for them. My decile 8 schools are not so happy, but I guess we'll work on that.
Lots of money there for new buildings. For me, it's the Venture Capital Fund, which is $300 million, quite a bit of which is sourced from the New Zealand Superannuation Fund. And it's about recognising the fact that we have lots of great startup companies in New Zealand, and quite often they have the ability to get money to get off the ground and get their product out there, but there's then a big gap, and if they're successful, in terms of them going to the next level. And this is where we lose a lot of companies who effectively, to get that capital, basically end up selling their IP offshore, and we lose some of the benefits here in New Zealand. So this $300 million fund is basically there to meet that gap and grow the companies that we really need to add value and add jobs into our economy. I think that's going to be a bit of a game changer in the years to come.
I hope so.
Yeah.
So just one thought, I suppose, to end on, and that is it's a very, very different budget. It's not focused on GDP or growth or those economic measures, though of course they matter too. And I suppose the thing that I enjoyed the whole performance of the budget, but as I listened to the Minister of Finance speak, and he ended with that wonderful quote from Robert Kennedy, and which is about the limits of GDP, and he says, GDP measures neither our wit nor our courage, neither our wisdom nor our learning, neither our compassion nor our devotion to our country. It measures everything, in short, except that which makes life worthwhile. And that's what we're trying to do with our budget.
Hear, hear. See you all.
Ka kite anō.